overarching theme is our industrial heritage, but as always, I don't believe you can study history in a vacuum. I don't think you can take one little tiny piece and look at it, because there's always things that interconnect and things that are important to the story and really the narrative of history. So you want to, we're ready for clicking there. So. All right, you can actually click down. There are several things. So U.S. in 1783, we're really looking at that. As you probably know, the Treaty of Paris of 1783 extended our western boundary to the Mississippi River, opening up all this territory with, Spain is controlling Florida. The good news is we were independent. The bad news is we're no longer part of the British Empire, which in spite of the fact that we were complaining bitterly about taxation and navigation acts and all of that, it was a pretty sweet deal being part of the British Empire. So for example, all those laws that restricted us trading within the empire said now that you're not in the empire, we couldn't trade in the empire. So the West Indies trade, all of those things were lost to us. We reestablished them pretty quickly, but we were maritime colonies of a maritime nation, so all our cities faced the sea, and that's going to be true probably till about 1840, and even the cities as they get established, places like Cincinnati and Louisville and St. Louis, they're all port cities even if they're inland. We have no army, navy in our foreign policy. The only real treaties of trade we have are with France. So, okay, I think we could click up there. All right. So, everybody was a farmer back then. No, not everybody. About 5% of the people were professional people, merchants and things like that. The problem is that in the 1780s, after 150 years of farming, the soil was really pretty depleted. The state's largely just deforested. Today, Connecticut is what, about 65 or 70% forest? Back then it was about 25. They just cut down. And actually we have that stereotypical view of the New England, the stone walls and the farmers and all that, and that doesn't start until about the time of the Revolution, because it took over 100 years for us to really destroy the soil to the point that we started getting frost heave from those lovely rocks and stones that the glacier had deposited about, what, 12 or 13,000 years ago. And also the other thing we need to understand is that the differential in the size of the communities isn't that great. We only have 3 communities, Hartford, New Haven, and Middletown, that have more than 5,000 people. So, and all of the towns in Connecticut had almost the same representation. I think the cities had 2 representatives, but all the towns had 1. So this is perfectly okay when Farmington had, what, about 3,500 people at this time. By the time you get to 1920, and when about a third of the people are living in the 5 biggest cities, and the 5 cities still only have 1 or 2 votes in the legislature, the farm communities have a great deal of power. So that's a whole other issue. Okay, so I think we're ready to click. All right, so what are our key issues? We need to find some new markets. We don't have any infrastructure at all. There's not a single bank in Connecticut. Transportation is limited. The population is burgeoning on a farm community. Your labor force was your children, right? And given the fact that sadly about 1 child in 5 or 6 died before their first birthday, and another about 20% died by the time they got to 11 or 12 from what we used to call the childhood diseases. You all know what childhood diseases are, right? Yeah. I have teenage daughters. They have no idea what I'm talking about, because they didn't have the mumps and the measles and the chickenpox and all the things that I had by the time I was about 9. So. So we're also running out of land because as the population grows by about 1800 there just isn't any more farmland, and what's available is exhausted. Politics, we have the state is controlled by a very small group of wealthy individuals, unlike today, right? And then what we're going to see is economic changes where we're talking about at the beginning of the period people are farming. We're going to see mills develop, textile mills especially, factories. We're going to see whaling starts to become big after about 1760 or so, and eventually we get into things like insurance as well, right? We all know that Hartford used to be the center of the insurance industry, right? Today, is it Des Moines today? I think it's Des Moines. But all right. So Connecticut, at the end of the Revolution, we only had 6 counties. But we see a period of rapid growth. So in 1783, there's 80 towns. In the next 10 years, 27 towns are incorporated. Now, these are towns that had population, but they were growing pretty quickly. In 1784, we designated the first 5 cities, Hartford, New Haven, Middletown, Norwich, and New London all had city designation. Today we have, what, 32 cities, I think, and they're all coterminous with, like, the city of Hartford is coterminous with Hartford. Groton City is only a part of Groton for some odd reason. Okay, and the population is growing. Now, previous to this, in the previous 50 years, the population had quadrupled. And again, that's lots of people living on farms and lots of people having lots of children and growing and spreading out. We're going to see that slow down, and there's a couple of reasons for that. So by 1790, we have about 237,000 people, which is a growth rate of, what, about 20%? Okay. All right, so let's look at this quickly. Okay. So we see 250, 260, 275. So it's growing at a much slower rate. Now, part of the reason for this is people are starting to move out. Because if you're continuing to have children and there's no more good farmland for them, they're going to move places like up to Vermont, which was called New Connecticut for a while, and people like Ethan Allen and others were going up that way. Especially after the War of 1812 and the Mohawk River Valley is opened and they start to build the Erie Canal and all that, there's lots and lots of Connecticut people who move out there because it's good farmland, it's a good way to travel west. We also get some land in Ohio, which we'll get to. So at any rate, it's not so much if you looked at the birth rate, we wouldn't say, oh yeah, the birth rate's dropped off and that's why the population isn't growing. The birth rate, I'm pretty sure, in an agricultural society doesn't drop a whole lot. It might drop some, but we have a significant percentage of people moving out. Okay. Oh. And I just did this. Okay, so let's the Western Reserve would be the firelands. The charter we got from Charles II in 1662 said our western boundary was the South Sea, which is about here. It's the Pacific Ocean, right? Nobody knew the geography back then. A lot of Europeans were hoping that North America ended about here because they really wanted to get to China. So after the Revolution, and actually Ohio, which is part of the Northwest Territories, if you look at a map of Ohio about 1800, it's Virginia has land claims and New York has land claims, so it's all divided up. What we got in exchange for extinguishing any claims we had beyond here was this little strip in northern Ohio. It's called the Western Reserve, and the western third of that was called the Firelands. And if you had lost property to the British during any of the British raids, in London, New Haven, Fairfield, Norwalk. What's that? Simsbury. Yes. Yeah. If you had lost property to British raids, you were entitled to get land out here in the Fireland section. So the eastern 2/3 of the Western Reserve is sold to the Connecticut Land Company. Connecticut Land Company bought it for $1.2 million. It was a group of Connecticut investors headed by Moses Cleveland. They went out and they laid out townships all along here, and on the Cuyahoga River, Moses built a little town which he named for himself, right? Except Moses Cleveland had an A in his name. It was C-L-E-A, like cleave, like separate, and somewhere along the line the E got lost, and I don't know any historian that knows why that happened, except sometimes cartographers make mistakes, right? So at any rate, the western land out here, and if you drive out through northern Ohio, Route 80 goes right through there. Has anybody ever done that? Yeah, you go through towns like Avon and Farmington, and if you get off the highway, you see white clapboard churches and houses, and you say to yourself, wow, it feels like I'm in New England. Well, you kind of are, because a lot of those starchy, staunch New Englanders moved out there. So most of the people that got land didn't end up settling out. There's only very few, because the divisions were done in the, 1784 were the first divisions. The treaties weren't really signed with the Native Americans till after about 1800, and then you had, Harrison and the Battle of Tippecanoe and all that. So it really, it's really after 1815 when people are moving out there. So very often it's not the people that lost their property, it might be their children or their grandchildren. They might actually be selling the rights to their lands. And then of course the whole rest of the Northwest Territories. Northwest Territories would be north of the Ohio and east of the Mississippi. It's today the states of Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, Ohio, Wisconsin, and this little tiny part of Minnesota. So St. Paul, Minnesota was actually originally part of the Northwest Territories, even though the rest of it wasn't. Okay. Oh yeah, and then Iowa and Kansas, but we'll get to that. Okay, so politics. Connecticut is dominated by a group called the Standing Order. These are the Federalists. They were staunch Congregationalists all. The Congregational Church was the established church in Connecticut colony, and that carried on into the state of Connecticut, because when the Declaration of Independence was written in 1776, 11 of the 13 colonies, they had royal charters, and you can't have an instrument of government signed by the King of England when you're basically telling the King of England to go fly a kite, right? So everyone else is writing new constitutions. We didn't. We had our charter from 1662, and the Connecticut politicians reasoned that it wasn't the charter that established our government, but it was all the laws we had passed under the charter. So they felt comfortable maintaining the charter, and the problem with that is the charter said if you're not a Congregationalist, you're a heretic, more or less, and it said everybody had to pay to support the Congregational ministers. So these would be the leaders of the Congregational Church. So connected with Yale, an awful lot of the Standing Order are Yale graduates. In the early days they were ministers. That's going to switch over to where they're going to be lawyers. They all support the new federal government, though. They think that the idea of that new central powerful government is a really, really good idea. In opposition, you have a growing number of Baptists, Quakers, and Episcopalians. And essentially, the Episcopalians they're generally going to vote with the Congregationalists. Now, Episcopalians, that's Church of England, right? So they had been... some of them have been Tories in the past, and the Tories weren't looked upon all that kindly. But anyway, so that's the political standing at that point. And then what happens? Yeah. Oh, yeah. So the Congregational Church is the established church. Everybody pays their taxes, but to keep the Episcopalians happy, because they're a growing number, every year the legislature votes to give them an annual payment. So if you're an Episcopalian, you're paying local taxes that go to the Congregational Church, but at the end, every year your church would get a certain amount of money back from the state, kind of like the $55 you're getting from, 1816, the Federalists decide that they don't want to pay the Episcopalians. They say, you know what, we're not coughing up the money. So the Episcopalians get mad and they vote with the Baptists and the Quakers. In the election of 1817, the Federalists are kicked out. And so we have the Republicans, not the Lincoln Republicans, not the Republicans of Newt Gingrich and today, but we're talking about the Jeffersonians, right? So we see the Republicans take over, and in 1818 they call for a new constitution. There's a constitutional convention, and a new constitution is written, and there's a number of things that happen, but the most important is that the Congregational Church is disestablished. So we are no longer a theocracy. You no longer have to, Congress shall make no law establishing, religion, right? So we finally complied with it. Rhode Island had a similar situation. They didn't change their constitution until 1843. So, okay, manumission, and this is just sort of catch us up here. Manumission is gradual emancipation. In Connecticut, about the time of the Revolution, there were about 5,000 slaves on a population of around 200,000 or so. So we're talking about 2.5% of the population. At this time, a lot of people looked at the revolution and they said, you know what, this is really about fighting tyranny and injustice and equality for all, and Jefferson said all men are created equal. So a lot of people started to think, maybe slavery is not such a good idea. So in 1781, the Massachusetts Supreme Court ruled that slavery in Massachusetts was unconstitutional per their constitution they'd written the year before. So as of 1782, slavery was gone in Massachusetts. What we see in all the other northern states is they passed these gradual emancipation laws. So in 1784 here in Connecticut, we passed a law that says all people held in bondage born after 1784, not everybody, everybody born after today will be free by the time they reach 25. Now the reason for the gradualism, there were a couple of reasons. In Pennsylvania did this, New York did this, New Hampshire did it, Rhode Island did it. There's two reasons for that. The first is that the people that own slaves have a substantial financial interest in the slaves. And you're not going to make a lot of friends by saying, we're taking your personal property as of tomorrow. Right? If the state of Connecticut outlawed gasoline-powered cars, it would be all right if they said in 20 years, and you have 20 years to kind of figure out what you're doing. If they said as of tomorrow, there'd be an uproar, right? It'd be a problem. So part of the idea was the recognition of the economic aspect of slavery. The other thing is the whole idea of integration within society. There was some concern that if you took all of the people who were held as slaves and you just sort of let them free in society, bad things would happen. And you know, certainly it was a very racist attitude, but it was fairly common at the time. So. Let's suppose, let's go back to the car thing. Let's suppose you knew that in 5 years in Connecticut you couldn't drive your internal combustion engine, but New York didn't have any laws like that. What do you suppose people would do? Go to New York and sell their cars, right? That seems to be happening here because 4 years later there's a law passed saying if you own slaves you have to register them. And by the way, if you register a slave that's registered, cannot be taken out of state. So the idea is that probably, I think, reflects the fact that some people are trying to sell their slaves. What we do know is by 1790, the number of slaves had dropped almost in half. Now, I would like to think there were some kind-hearted people who thought, you know, slavery really isn't such a good idea, and it's on the way out anyway, and so some people were set free just out of, but I also am pretty sure that that economic motive was there, and I'm pretty sure that this law is passed to keep people from doing that. In 1797, the age was dropped to 21. Yeah, so by 1790, it's about cut in half. By 1800, it's down to 900. 1810, about 300. Slavery's not abolished here in Connecticut until 1848. And the anecdote is, and I've never seen this in actual print, I've seen lots of historians say, we don't know this is true, but supposedly there were 6 slaves that were affected by the law in 1848. So. Have any of you read Matt Warshauer's book on Connecticut and the Civil War and slavery? Yeah, that's really sort of, I think, it's an eye-opener, I think, because a lot of people think, well, we here in the North, we didn't like slavery, and that's not true at all. Okay. Let's get into industry, which is what we're all here for, right? Probably the most important early industry is the iron industry. If we remember our discussion of the geology of Connecticut, let's see, from your point, is this right from your point? No, it'd be this way, okay. Northwestern Connecticut, is that, would the tail be here? Yeah, okay. Northwestern Connecticut, that's part of the North American Craton, that's the oldest bedrock, right? There's iron up there, right? And then right alongside that is the old coral reef that got subsumed and is these huge limestone deposits. If there's a couple of things you need to make iron, it's iron ore and limestone, right? The third thing you need is coal. Well, you need some sort of carbon source. There's no coal up there, right? The nearest coal is somewhere in Pennsylvania. There are thousands of acres of trees and some really, really big trees. You know, there were what we would call the primeval forests, you know, the big, you know, the trees that are like, wow, yeah. They weren't just sort of like, oh yeah, there's one down the street there and go take a picture of it. They were everywhere up in this region. So what's the iron industry up here is going to be fueled by charcoal. And from before the revolution, we were exporting iron ore to England until they passed a law saying we couldn't do that because it was depressing the price of iron in England. But in the early Republic days, and really probably up to about 1850, what we see is even though it's a small region, we're producing lots and lots and lots of iron, and it's very high quality. It was used. It was in high demand for people making guns because it was such a high quality. So, so what do you do with the iron ore? There's a couple things you can do. If you have a blast furnace, you can turn it into pig iron, and pig iron is you cook it up and you melt it, and then you have a little channel that runs down, and then they have little channels running off, right? And they all fill up, and you get these little bars of iron, right? And somebody somewhere along the line, they looked at the iron ore flowing out like this and filling it up, and it looked like little suckling piglets. So they call it pig iron, right? So the pig iron it's not overly refined, but it's workable. So the pig iron, blacksmiths would buy the pig iron, and then they might make their own stuff. Or you'd put it into a forge, and in the forge, you'd be turning it into wrought iron. Up in the Salisbury region, there were 22 blast furnaces, and it's not a very big area. There were 51 forges. Now a forge, you're going to heat it up again, and it's like a blacksmith, but you're not doing this, right? You know, we see the blacksmith heat it up, and the guy's got, you know, what was it? Longfellow under the spreading chestnut tree, the village smithy stands, and he's got muscles that are, he doesn't have to go to the gym, right? The forge, what you had is probably some version of a trip hammer, which essentially runs on power. So you get this big hammer that, you know, might weigh 300 or 400 or 500 pounds, and it gets lifted up mechanically. And then when the cam hits, it drops down, and instead of you hitting it 30 or 40 times, this thing hits it once and knocks out the impurities. Okay. All right, so iron making, you would then probably send it to a foundry. This is a foundry in Salisbury where they were making cannon. And in the iron region, not only were we making iron that was useful for you know, people making weapons and tools and things like that, cannon, anchors, and chain. And again, if you think of Connecticut as a maritime colony of a maritime country, shipbuilding, I think, by the time of the Revolution was probably about our fourth largest industry. Fully 1/3 of all the ships that the English were sailing were made in the colony. So there was a huge demand for cannon, for anchors and anchor chain and fixtures and all of that stuff. And the other thing that the iron is going to be used for is muskets especially. So, and in 1845, iron was third on the list of manufacturers in the state of Connecticut, behind wool and cotton, because textiles were so extremely important. All right. Oh, let's go back to the rivers. Okay. The rivers are going to be extremely important because in the early industrial revolution, it's water power that is going to be the source of energy. Now, the Connecticut River, I don't know that there was a single mill on the Connecticut River because it's too wide, it's too flat, and there's no place to build. What you want is something like the Quinebaug is terrific, the Willimantic, the Shetucket in here, the Upper Housatonic. You want a river valley that's kind of narrow. You want it rocky. You want to be able to put your mill on the bedrock if possible, because when that wheel turns, the whole building shakes. Have you ever been to Sturbridge Village and seen the sawmill when it runs? And it feels like it's about a 5-point earthquake. The whole building's going, right? Yeah, so you don't want to build a mill and then have it in 6 months it's falling down because, so if you can, so the narrow river valleys are important. The other thing you need is a pretty good pitch. You need probably somewhere between 10 and 15 foot drop every 200 feet because it's the gravity pulling the water along that's going to turn your water wheels, right? So at any rate, the Housatonic, the Naugatuck, and most of the Thames is going to be where we're going to see significant amount. Some on the Farmington, not so much. Okay. All right, so let's look at transportation. Transportation, Henry Ford said, you can't have mass production without mass consumption, right? So in spite of that silly movie that said, if you build it, they will come, doesn't, well, if it's a good restaurant, maybe, if they have good cheeseburgers, right? All right, so after the Revolution, the state of Connecticut is deeply in debt. We don't really have any money that we're going to invest in the roads. Most of the towns, they don't like taxing people unnecessarily. So most of the local roads are built and maintained by the towns. And essentially going back into the colonial era, what you had was, if you lived here in Simsbury, for example, you had to donate 2 or 3 days labor a year to the maintenance or building of roads or bridges and that sort of thing. So each community was supposed to be responsible. Doesn't always work that well, do you know what I mean? I don't know about you, but the day they called my brother out, not much was getting done, right? So, because of that, what we're going to see after about 1790 is the rise of turnpike companies. And a turnpike company, they need a charter from the state legislature. They're given a very specific route. For example, one of the early turnpikes is the Hartford and New Haven, which is 29 miles long. They're allowed to raise a certain amount of money through selling of stock. Usually the shares are about $100 a piece. Good turnpike would probably cost you about $1,000 a mile, which today, I know a lot of people could finance that themselves. Do you know what I mean? They could refinance their house or, you know. Back then, $29,000 to build was an enormous amount of money. So what you needed was the support of businessmen both in Hartford and New Haven. Now there's 2 reasons you would invest in the turnpike company. One is you would hope that you would get a nice return of 5 to 7%. But the other reason is, if you were a business person in either Hartford or New Haven, you would hope that it would provide you with inexpensive transportation, so it would be good for your business as well. So we're going to see the investors in the turnpikes generally, at least in the larger communities. There are others, for example, there's a turnpike that runs from New Haven. Well, today it runs all the way up to Litchfield, but I think it was Litchfield and Farmington, and then Farmington and Wolcott, and it was divided up into sections. One of the key issues in industrialization is capital accumulation. Again, today, if you had a business idea and you needed some money, we could all probably go to the bank and say, here's my idea and here's collateral, and you could get a loan. Well, when there's no banks, you can't do that, right? And when money is at a premium, that's also extremely difficult. So the turnpikes, they're generally shorter roads. Over time, they become joined together. I believe there were 104 turnpikes chartered between about 1792 and about 1840. Now, if we got together and we decided to build a turnpike, we would have to get the right-of-way. We'd either have to buy the land or pay for the right-of-way. We'd have to clear the land. We'd have to set it up so people couldn't just kind of use it without, you know, we'd have to limit the access. And then we'd have to maintain it. And maintenance is really difficult because we're talking about dirt roads. And dirt roads in the summertime are incredibly dusty, and when it rains, they turn into big pools of mud. And in the wintertime, well, there were no snowplows back then, right? So maintenance is going to be extremely difficult. Some of the early turnpike companies, like the Hartford and New Haven, always did pretty well because it connected 2 communities. There were lots of people wanted to travel back and forth. If you wanted to take river traffic, you had to sail all the way on this way and around here. So that turnpike company did pretty well. Lots of the smaller ones didn't. And over time, what happens is they stop maintaining the roads because they can't afford it. Yes?
Were there tolls? Is that how
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah. And there was a whole toll charge, and I'm just making up the numbers because I can't remember exactly, but it might cost you 10 cents to ride your horse. If you had a wagon, it might be 12 cents. I know sheep were usually half a penny a piece. Yeah, the whole idea was that they were collecting tolls, but again, they have what they call turnpikes over in Cromwell. Yeah, there's one in Manchester. Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. So here's the road where you're going to have to pay, and then somebody builds the turnpike, which says, "Hey, here's a free road," right? So the turnpikes became pretty popular, and eventually, what happens is that many of the companies go belly up. Many of the companies say, "You know what? We're not making any money on this road, so we're not going to put any more money into it." So the state slowly takes them over, and a lot of the real early roads were actual turnpikes. I don't even have to talk about this, do I? We all know that canals, the canal era starts really in the 1790s. One of the first canals connects Boston with the Merrimack River. There's another one that connects Charleston with the Santee River. Canals are going to do a couple of things. They're going to take a port city that doesn't have a good river that runs inland. New Haven's a very good example. The Quinnipiac River is navigable for almost, 30 or 40 feet. The Mill River is pretty good, but doesn't get much past Hamden before it starts to narrow. So connecting either the city with the hinterland, or in the case of Boston, the Merrimack River doesn't flow into Boston, and the Merrimack River is reasonably navigable. So from your point of view, here's Boston, here's the Merrimack River. They thought, well, we run a canal up there, and then we're connected to because the city should be an entrepot, right? The city should be a place goods flow in, goods flow out, and the more that happens, the better the city, right? So here in Connecticut, there were 6 canal companies chartered. The only one that was ever built was the Farmington, which ran from New Haven Harbor up to Farmington, right up here through Simsbury. It ran up here to the state line. It didn't run beyond the state line because you could only charter it within the state, right? The Hampshire and Hamden Canal is chartered a few years later here in Massachusetts, and that runs all the way to Northampton. So eventually it's called it goes bankrupt, they both go bankrupt, and it gets reformed as the New Haven and Northampton Rail Canal. They don't do much better, right? Eventually what happens to a lot of the canals is let me start by saying canals, even to this day, if you're looking at the effective use of energy, this is the best way to move bulk goods. If you're talking about the amount of horsepower that you need to move, say, a ton of firewood or coal or iron ore or refrigerators, this is highly effective. The only problem with canals is that if they're not perfectly level, you have problems. So one of the ideas is, one of the theories was they were going to build a canal network much like the interstate railroad network and today the highway network. And so you got the Erie Canal coming here over to Albany. There was this idea that from Boston to Albany they'd build a canal, and that the Farmington Canal would connect with that, and you'd just be able to leave right here in Simsbury and just sail all over the country and move stuff around. The only problem with that, have you ever driven the Massachusetts Turnpike? You get the other side of you're going up, you're going down, you're going up, you're going down. Yeah, you can't, that's extremely challenging for a canal. You're either going to have, well, in Pennsylvania they tried it. They actually had these steam devices that would lift the canal boats over the mountains, and it didn't work very well, and after a while one of the ropes separated and it fell and it killed about 30 people, and somebody said, this is a really dumb idea. So canals probably would have done better, but railroads came along. And one of the things that happens, that certainly happened here, and you all probably know, many of the canals were overbuilt by railroads. So About 75% of the cost of building a railroad is clearing the land, getting the right of way, getting it nice and flat, getting rid of the rocks and the trees and all that, and then laying the track itself isn't all that expensive. So when you look at the Farmington Canal, you have this 87-mile route. It's really flat. The rocks and the trees are cleared. So the Canal Railroad that was 1847, it followed the Farmington Canal, sometimes actually in the bed of the canal itself, sometimes on the towpath. Certain places, it actually varied. I know in Plainville, and I think parts of Farmington, where the canal was kind of doing this, they just ran the railroad right through town. So at any rate, railroads are, turnpikes were what, $1,000 a mile, canals $3,000 to $4,000 a mile, railroads $10,000 a mile if you're talking flat as a pancake, if you're talking hills, if you're talking trees, if you're talking any sort of problems at all, it could go up to 40,000 miles. So again, if you think about capital accumulation in the early republic, there's just not a lot of money there. So no one says, hey, let's build a railroad all the way across Connecticut here. It'll be 90-odd miles long. There just wasn't enough money. You might as well say, hey, let's all roller skate to the moon. It's just not possible. So the early railroads are going to be small, and over time they will consolidate. They'll join together. The very first railroad in Connecticut was 6 miles. It ran from the line here in Rhode Island all the way out here to Stonington. And it connected with the railroad that went up to Providence and to Boston. Now, one of the things, is there one more on there? Yeah, steamboats, okay. Essentially, people were taking steamboats from Boston to New York, and there were 2 problems with that. The first is sailing around Cape Cod, the currents are awful. And then when you get down here, coming around Point Judith, it's almost suicide. Suicide? Yeah, suicide, okay. So when this little 6-mile railroad here meant you could take the train down to here, miss all of that, get on a steamboat, and sail down Long Island through Hell's Gate. So that railroad was extremely important. Have we been to Stonington at all? There are places where you can see the old track. It went between houses. And I mean, if there's a house here and a house about here, and this little, what you would consider not even a driveway, but kind of a little alleyway, there's tracks that run through there. Like if you can imagine, you'd like the train going by, like this far, you could reach out and touch the train as it goes by. At any rate, so that's the first railroad. And again, it's not built within the state, it's built to connect. The second railroad is going to be built, it's going to be a connection of this road here. It's going to run eventually all the way to New Haven. So it's going to be part of really this New York system. The next thing that happens, bridge building technology back then was dreadful. Either A, most of the bridges you looked at, you probably wouldn't think were safe enough to cross, or they just couldn't do it. For example, the first railroad bridge across the Thames River here, I think was 1873 or 74, and it's the first railroad bridge across the Connecticut River was at about a similar time. So early on, it was decided that the best railroads would run north and south in the river valley, so you don't have to worry about building bridges. So again, the Hartford-New Haven Railroad is going to be the first railroads built. Again, it's about 29 miles. They're then going to build a couple of, let's see, you have there's the Houstonic River, there's the Naugatuck Valley Railroad. There's a couple here. There's one that runs up each side of the Thames River. One runs off to Palmer, Massachusetts, and the other runs up here to Worcester, I think. So these railroads were fairly easy to build, and of course here's the Canal Railroad, which was built right over the Farmington Canal. Eventually, though, they do start to build the smaller sections here. But see, when you got to the Connecticut River, there was a ferry boat there, and the train, which was probably only about 6 cars, they would put it on the ferry boat, and you would cross the river. Well, it took about 2 or 3 hours, right? Sometimes you could ride over. Some people were nervous about that, and they would actually get off and ride separately. And you did the same thing when you got to the Thames River here. So it was a very, very slow process. Eventually, what's going to happen is that some railroads are really profitable, some are less so. They almost all connect to steamboat lines. So if you came down the canal railroad here and you got to New Haven, there was probably a steamboat that was connected with the canal railroad that you could just walk right up and say, buy your ticket, and you could just sail right off. It would only take you about 12 hours to go from here to here, right? Could take longer. Eventually what we start to see is consolidation. So fairly early on we see the New York and New Haven Railroad, right? And then they get into the Hartford, and so it becomes the New York, New Haven, Hartford Railroad, which becomes shortened to the New Haven Railroad, right? Now, some of you probably remember, well, you don't remember, in 1935, the New Haven Railroad went bankrupt because of the shenanigans of the J.P. Morgan and others who were playing with the stock and doing weird things with it. So after 1935, anytime the Hartford Courant referred to the New Haven Railroad, it always had the adjective, the bankrupt New Haven Railroad. Do you remember the bankrupt? Yeah, sure. When I was a kid, if you're going to New York, you would say, I'm taking the bankrupt to New York City, right? Because it just became part of the lexicon there. Anyway. All right, banking. Banking is extremely important for capital accumulation. 1791, we have the first bank in the United States. State banks start to get chartered about that time. The people buying the stock, you needed $100 a share. The only people that had $100 a share were mostly people, members of the standing order, the wealthy, the ministers, the merchants, that sort of thing. Early on, all the major cities are going to have banks. The first three banks are in Hartford, New London, and New Haven. And in 1804, we tried to create a state bank of Connecticut, but most people didn't like that. I'm not sure why. I've always thought the standing order would have loved that because they could have dominated that, right? What do they say, the rich get richer? All right, let's, what happened there? They're supposed to be oh.
No.
I know what happened. I cut this in from another one and the numbering came up. Okay. So anyway, bank stocks were considered a real safe investment, mostly because if, let's say, a bank was chartered here in Simsbury and they had $100,000 worth of money, they would probably take about $50,000 of it and invest it in a bank in New York where they'd draw 1 or 2 or 3% interest and be very happy with that, right? Banks become chartered to help businesses. The Mechanics Bank was chartered in 1824 or 25 to help the Farmington Canal. The financing wasn't going very well. So the banks which were considered a great investment, the Mechanics Bank, I believe they had to invest $200,000 in Farmington Canal stock, right? So they were selling the Mechanics Bank stock and Farmington Canal stock the same day, and they're actually forcing you could get 1 share of bank stock if you bought 1 share of canal stock. The Mechanics Bank, I think they sold out in less than an hour, and the Farmington Canal stock still didn't sell out, even forcing people to buy it. So it was at any rate, in 1820, the problem with the banks is that they're being controlled by the standing order. And back then, you and I, as the average person, farmer, you couldn't just walk in and say, yeah, I'd like to borrow a couple $100, like buy a new plow or mule, or it was really sort of an elitist system. If you were part of the standing order, if you were connected to people, you could get a loan not by filling out a form. You just say, you need $30,000. I think I have it on me. Here you go. So there was very little regulation. In 1825, the Eagle Bank in New Haven collapses. It supposedly had $700,000 worth of assets. It had over $1 million worth of debts. And when they opened the bank vaults, they were essentially empty. Now, the guy that was the president of the bank, he managed to skip town. He moved to Ohio, and he got elected governor of Ohio about 20 years later. So, but see, that's the beauty. They talk about, America being, you can always reinvent yourself, right? And the American West was always supposed to be the place you could start over. This guy got a really good start over, right? So, At any rate, after this, this created a local depression throughout central Connecticut and especially in New Haven. And this is about the time the Farmington Canal is starting to draw their money in. So it's pretty easy to see at a point when the canal needed money, money got really, really tight because people didn't want to put their money in banks. What they were doing is putting it in an old sock and stuffing it under their mattress, right? So for the next 12 years, every bank charter that's put before the General Assembly is vetoed. They don't want anything to do with banks. And then in 1837, they create a system of bank commissioners. And supposedly the bank commissioners are supposed to oversee what the banks are doing. Unfortunately, these are still people that are appointed by the General Assembly, which is still controlled by the wealthy. So this doesn't work the way it's supposed to, but it is the beginning. And here you see the banks very often issued their own money. So this is a banknote on the Mechanics Bank worth 10 cents. 10 cents. They're trying to do away with pennies today, right? So, at any rate, and you can see it says Mally's on there, which is this is sort of a promotional thing. But at any rate, the problem with this is that it might be worth 10 cents in New Haven, but go to New York. And they might give you 8 cents or 7 cents or 6 cents on it. So, without a national banking system, it's just not going to work for it. But at any rate, once we have a basic banking system, then industrialization can move forward. Okay. So then we come to Eli Terry. Terry is born 1772. Terry becomes a clockmaker. He's apprenticed, and at this point they have what they call tall clocks. Right? If I were a clockmaker back then, it would probably take me about 3 months to make this. I'd make every single part of it. I would cut all the gears inside. American clocks back then were made of wood. So the good news is it's a lot easier to cut the wooden gears. The bad news is, on a humid day, on a hot day, it doesn't work very well. So at any rate, to be a clockmaker meant you knew how to do all of these various tasks. And one of the things we're going to see with industrialization is sort of the breaking down of tasks, right? So one of the things the first thing Terry's going to do is he's going to come up with the idea of the shelf clock, which is a lot smaller. Do we have shelf clocks around here? Yeah. About this big, right? And he's going to start mass producing them. He's going to sign a contract to produce 6,000 clocks in a year. And again, let's think about it. He could probably build 3 or 4 of these if he was really, really working hard, right? So the idea that he's going to build 6,000 clocks in a year. Now, he's not building the cases, he's building the works. That's the first thing he decides is that, and very often back then, when you bought a clock, you got the clock, and then either you would hire someone to make a nice case for you, or if you were handy dandy like I am, you'd go home and you'd build your own little case, right? And then my wife would say, what the heck are you doing? Why didn't you pay somebody to get a nice case, right? So Terry is the first to really try to mass produce clocks. And the idea is that if he hires all of you to work in his clock factory, you're not all doing all of the tasks. One of you is going to cut the dial. Another person is going to paint the dial. Someone else is going to cut the gears. Someone else is going to make the hands, right? Someone else is going to start screwing the pieces together. So essentially, if we just start down the line and we get this simple mass production, it's faster. You don't need to be as skilled, right? Because if you know how to do this, you are a highly skilled artisan. If all you're doing is taking the little screw and you're putting it in and then you hand it on, but that's much less is required in terms of training or background. So he really starts to mass produce the clocks, and he does. It actually takes him 2 years to build the clocks, and he gets a contract with a couple of brothers who live in the Danbury area, and they're selling his clocks, and what they're doing is they're selling them from horseback. So they're riding around and they're sort of Yankee peddler thing. So they're showing up at the farmhouse and they're convincing people they need clocks. Now this takes a little bit of convincing because in an agrarian society, you don't need a clock. You get up at sunup, you stop working when it gets dark, and they've done studies that in an agricultural society, there were more ways to describe time. I mean, today, the other day I said to my daughter, I said, it's 8:45. And she said, how many minutes is that? And I said, 15, and because she's 8, right? And she doesn't get the analog clock thing very well. So I could say it's 10 after 10 or in a farm society, I might say, I'll be over around sunup. I'll be over a little after sunup. I'll be over by the time the sun is over your barn. Right? You always knew when it was lunchtime because the sun was directly overhead. It didn't matter if it's wintertime and it's tracking this way or if it's summertime and it's tracking this way. You always knew, the median point that. So initially, it's kind of a hard sell, but over time, within about 15 years, clocks become essential. And when we start talking about people moving west and they're selling their land and they're selling most of their tools and they're bringing clothes and a few basic tools, every family has a shelf clock that they're taking with them. And if you could go back and visit a lot of the pioneer cabins where people were living under really crude and simple conditions, the pioneer family, the standard is, what do you need? You need an axe, you need a musket, you need a hoe. And that's it, right? But you got your shelf clock, right? So, clocks are also going to become extremely important in the industrial world because what happens in industrialization is in an agrarian society, you work by the task. I'm going to go out and plow this field. Now, I might finish it today. It might take me 2 or 3 days. When I'm done, I finish that task, right? In an agrarian society, I make my own decisions, right? If it looks like rain, rheumatism's acting up, I'm going to knock off a few hours early and go home. And I'm probably going to do something else. I might be repairing fences or that sort of thing. You get into the industrial world, and it's task labor, right? It's timed. One of the hardest things the early mills had to do was to get people to come in on time. You're supposed to, the bell rings at 7, you're supposed to be here. Yeah, but it was still dark. I don't care, it was 7 o'clock, right? In the wintertime, it would get dark early. If you were supposed to work a 12-hour day, lots of people went home at 4 o'clock. Well, the workday's over. Of course the workday's over, it's getting dark. No, you work by the hour. So getting people used to working by the hour, the clocks became extremely important. And it's about this time you see that in most communities, you have a clock on maybe the town hall, maybe the congregational church, but that's the time, right? And here in Simsbury, if there's a church down here, right? If that church had a big clock, that was Simsbury time. And Farmington time might be 2 or 3 minutes off, and Hartford time might be 12 minutes off. And then, of course, you get the other problem is very often when you set the clock, you wait for the sun to be up here, right? So let's see, in Boston, the sun is up here at, let's see, it's noon in Boston. It's probably what, about 14 minutes of here? So yeah, when the train started running, it was really confusing, and there were some really horrendous accidents because, train's coming in at such and such a time, and it would come in a little early, and then you get the train going north and the train going south, and these horrific accidents, right? So at any rate, so clocks become really essential over time. And then we get Samuel Slater, who is considered the father of the American Industrial Revolution. Slater's born in England. He's born to a fairly middle-class type family. He becomes apprenticed to a man by the name of Richard Arkwright. Richard Arkwright had come up with the first spinning machine that was powered by water. It was called a water frame, and it absolutely revolutionized spinning because before that, well, the woman would sit, you kind of spin and you spin and you twitch, yeah. So if you can imagine a machine that does, when this thing starts running, it'll scare the heck out of you because it's like clattering, and you have what, about 20 or more like 40 spindles that are all just going all at once, right? So Arkwright's invention revolutionized textiles. Now, it was illegal for anyone working in the textile industry to leave England because they wanted to maintain the secrets, right? So Slater works for 7 years as an apprentice. He's being trained to be a factory manager. He's not being apprenticed just to continue to sort of run this machine for the rest of his life. He knows how to take the machines apart. He knows how to clean them. He knows how to fix them. So he memorizes the entire system, and in 1793 he emigrates to America. Now, when he goes down to the ship and they say, "What do you do?" First thing he does is he's wearing old clothes. And when they say, "What are you doing?" he says, "I'm just a farmer and I'm going to America to find my fortune." And the guy said, "Good luck, get on the ship, get out of here," right? There was a bonus being offered, I think it was £100, for anyone who could take the English system and bring it to America. So when that was part of his logic. So when he gets to America, he tries New York. He doesn't do very well. He ends up in Providence. He meets Moses Brown. The Brown family had made a lot of money in the West Indies trade. They dabbled in slavery, although by this time Moses is an abolitionist. And Moses is looking to open an English-style textile mill. And so when Slater approaches him, Moses Brown had been burned in the past. There a couple people had showed up and said, "I know how to," and then he gave them money and they disappeared. So he says to Slater, he says, "I'll give you a little bit of money and I'll hook you up with my brother-in-law and see what you can do." And essentially what Slater is able to do is build a mill on the Pawtucket River, north end of Narragansett Bay. If you're looking for a really cool day trip, it's about 2 hours away. It's one of the best textile history museums. When everything's working, it's like you can walk in and they start off with a bale of cotton and they show you how they break it open and how it's ginned and how they go through and how all the different processes and all the different machines, and at the other end they knit socks. And it's like, holy cow. Anyway. With Moses Brown's investment, Slater builds the first really successful mill. It is so successful that people start copying it, and eventually Slater goes off on his own. He and his father-in-law, they build a number of mills here in Connecticut on the Quinebaug River Valley, including up in Putnam in that area. And Moses Brown, of course, he does what all really rich guys do, is he donates money to a university, right? Brown University is from the Brown family. Okay, I always get Pawtucket and Pawcatuck confused. Yes, okay, Pawtucket, Rhode Island. So within 20 years, what we see in southern Massachusetts, in Rhode Island, and in eastern Connecticut, just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of textile mills. All right, so here we go. This is, again, I love maps and rivers and all that. So it's really here in the Thames River Valley here, especially along the Quinebaug here. So we have places like Putnam and Dayville and Plainfield and I'm drawing a blank. Franklin, but also up here on the Willimantic River. Actually, this area. Have we been to Willimantic? On Old 66, yeah, that's the Thread City, right? And there's a very nice thread museum there. So at any rate, this river valley really becomes textiles. We've got iron up here, and we're going to see, well, the more modern factories are really along the Naugatuck. Okay. And then we get the concept of the mill village. So I'm going to build a mill along the river out here. I need people to work there. So I'm going to provide housing for them. I need to provide all the services they need. I'm going to build schools. I'm going to build churches. I'm going to build stores. It's a company store. So you all get to buy stuff from me. Very often you didn't get paid regularly. Like if you worked for the Collins Brothers Axe Company, you got paid once a year. But every week they would say, okay, you live in company housing, that's $10, and you got so much food. So at the end of the year, you'd sort of settle up. The reason for that is they didn't want to train you. And then if somebody say, hey, you know how to do that? We'll give you, yeah. So the company store is really, we could say it's a benefit, we could say it's a, you all know the old Tennessee Ernie Ford song, I owe my soul to the company store? Yeah, okay. So these are very paternalistic. Now, part of the issue is where do you get all the people to work in the mills? And in England, they use children. And Samuel Slater said, let's just go hire as many children as we can. They're expendable. They don't really have, you know, who cares if they get eaten up in the machinery? Most people thought that was a terrible idea. But one of the things they started to do was hire young women. We get the idea of the mill girls. So I need people to work in my mill. I'm going to go around to all the farming communities and I'm going to talk to the farmers and I'm going to say, you have some unmarried daughters that are maybe 16 to 20 or so? Are you tired of having them live at home? What are their prospects? Are they going to get married? I can offer them a great opportunity. They can come and work in my mill. I'll give them a place to live. There's family housing, but there's also dormitory housing. In the dormitory housing, they had what you would call, what, a sorority mom or something. It was very strict. You know, young men weren't allowed, alcohol wasn't allowed, smoking wasn't allowed, so the girls were closely monitored. There was a church. I would guarantee you that if your daughter came to work in my mill, she would go to church every Sunday, and if she didn't, she'd be fired. Very often, they were provided with Bibles as well. There was Bible study and things like that. It also provided recreation, parks and things like that. So, so the mill villages are extremely important. This is Whitneyville. It's an artist's conception of what Whitneyville looked like here, right? This is the Mill River. This is all overgrown today. Have we been to Whitneyville? Hamden, yes. Yeah, there's not a lot there, but it's one of those places if you get there and you wander around and you think about it, and it's a lovely place to take photographs. At any rate, so what happens? Let's talk about the whole concept of the villas, Whitneyville. As a mill village will develop, it'll take on the name of the largest mill owner, and they'll put Ville on the end. After about 1825, 1824, the Marquis de Lafayette, he came to visit Connecticut. It was the 50th anniversary coming on of the Declaration of Independence, and everybody was really excited, and Lafayette had been about 18 or 19 when he was an aide-de-camp originally. And so we just had great celebrations and we're really full of ourselves and very proud. And so that French concept of ville, meaning we sort of adopted that. So from in the next 20 years, there are any number of small communities that pop up and they get ville stuck on the end of it. So let's see, like in Bristol, there's the Forestville, which is the old Forest Lock Company. In Wallingford, Yalesville was the Yale Lock Company. Tariffville, sure, yeah. Yeah, I was actually driving, I saw Floydville Road back up there, and I thought, I wonder if that's a mill or just, because it could also be some guy named Floyd lived out there, right? So, at any rate, so there were probably over 100 mill communities in Connecticut about that time. Some of them still exist. Only 2 of them are one of the 169 towns in Connecticut. I live in one of them that's Plainville, which there was no mill at Plain. It was just, Plainville's just flat as a pancake and sandy and not very good farmland. And Montville's the other one, which used to be part of New London, right? So, at any rate, the other area we're going to see, the other source of labor is going to be people moving inward migration. So early on, we're going to see Irish Catholics moving in. They're early on going to build canals and railroads, and they're going to hang around and continue to work in other industries. The French-Canadian Catholics are moving into, especially the Quinebaug River Valley. They work in the textile mills. So if you go into all of these little towns along the Quinebaug River, and they just have that real sense of an old-fashioned Puritan Yankee community with the Congregational Church and all of that. There's always a Catholic cemetery. And when the first time I encountered that, I thought, that doesn't make any sense to me. But then I started to make this connection. So you have these people moving, and German immigrants after 1848, the revolutions of 1848 and the failed, all of that. The German immigrants tended to be highly skilled laborers, so they're going to start working in the factories. One of the aspects of industrialization that we always forget about is it's not just the really cool things like, say, the cotton gin or clocks, but it's the machines that help to make the things like milling machines and screw making machines and things like that. So anyway, the Germans are vital in that. Okay. And then we get Eli Whitney. Eli Whitney was not from Connecticut. He was from Massachusetts. I know that that's probably heretical of me to say, but we all know the story of the cotton gin. Do we know the story of the cotton gin? He goes to Yale, and he gets a degree. He doesn't want to be a minister. And like many young people with a college degree, he can't find a job. One place there are jobs is tutoring, and he goes south and he's working on a plantation, and he's tutoring the children of the plantation owner, and he's watching the slaves picking the seeds out of the cotton, and it takes a very, very long time. It takes, I think they can do 3 or 4 pounds a day, which is, cotton's not very heavy. I should have brought my cotton in. I have a whole box of cotton. So he came up with the idea. The cotton gin was essentially, it looks kind of like a saw blade, but you can think of it more as a comb. Right? And what happens is the teeth come out like this, and they grab all the little fibers, and they pull the fibers down, and what's left is the seeds, right? So it's a very simple invention. He invents the cotton gin. It's so popular that by the time he gets around to patenting it, there are probably 150 or 200 people that have copied it. It takes him years and years and years. I think it's close to sometime in the 1820s when he actually goes south and actually makes some money on it. But at any rate, so he doesn't make money on that. In 1798, he gets a contract for the U.S. government to build 10,000 muskets. The interesting thing is he never built a musket in his life. Didn't really know what he was doing. But he's going to establish a plant in Whitneyville, which is on the Mill River, and he's going to start experimenting with the concept of interchangeable parts. Now, let's see, if we all had this cell phone and we all took our cell phones apart, I could take my case and put it on your phone, or we would expect all the parts to be the same. That wasn't always the case. When people are making these clocks one by one, the gears in this clock would not necessarily fit in the gears of another clock, even if I made both of them. Right? So the idea that the parts were standardized it was a foreign idea. So Whitney starts experimenting with interchangeable parts, and he actually goes to an exposition. He brings in 5 muskets that he's made, and he puts them on a table, and he takes them all apart, and then he says, okay, you hand me a stock, and you hand me the screw, and you hand me the lever, and he just takes the parts from these 5, and he puts them together in the gunworks, and everybody's amazed. Everybody says, wow. Now, he cheated, because he made all the parts by hand, and then he started to play with them. And so he'd take the trigger guard from something, and he'd put it on that wire, so he'd file it down, right? So when he was done, he didn't have a machine that was like stamping them all out like we would today, so that my Ford Taurus looks like your Ford Taurus. But he did it all by hand, but he still amazed the heck out of people. And the government was willing to give him extra time, because he was supposed to produce these in 2 years, and it took him about 9 years, right? Probably the most important thing he does, though, is he invents, nobody knows who invented the milling machine. There were a lot of people that understood having a machine that could, drill the holes, and was extremely important. He makes a lot of advances to it. He gets a lot of credit for it. And again, a lot of the Industrial Revolution is the machines that make it possible. We look at Samuel Colt, for example, and Colt's, revolver and all that stuff. But Colt and his people, the machines that they designed to make the parts were extremely important, including 2 people that worked for him, Francis Pratt and Amos Whitney, who went off and started their own company. They didn't build airplanes. They built milling machines and screw making machines and die cutting machines, and they made a small fortune making the machines that made the Industrial Revolution possible, right? It's not till we get to Frederick Rentschler that he buys it up and he starts doing what he does. Okay. We might even get done. How are we doing for time? Are we?
I don't know.
Oh, okay, we'll finish with Christian Sharps then. Christian Sharps, he gets a patent for most muskets load their muzzle loaders. Right, you light up like this, and you put the powder in, you ram it all down. It only takes about 20 seconds to reload, right? He comes up with the idea of a breech loading gun and actually a cartridge. All right, takes 5 seconds to reload. This was a miracle, right? He gets the patent in 1851, in 1840. In 1851, he moves to Hartford. Now, the Sharps Rifle Company was on what is today Capitol Avenue, about where the Armory is. You know, the state capitol's here. If you start going down Capitol Avenue, yeah, that was called Rifle Avenue. And it ended not far beyond that because the river went through there, you know, the river that's now underground. So Hartford becomes known before Colt moves in. Hartford becomes known as a place where fine weapons are made. This is a breech loader. This was the best weapon of the time. This is the weapon that Henry Ward Beecher, he was Harriet's sister, and yeah. Henry Ward Beecher was he was the minister of the Plymouth Congregational Church, which is in Brooklyn, New York. It was the largest church in America. Had about 2,000 people come to church every Sunday, and he was raising money for Kansas, for bloody Kansas and all that. So he would take in the money and he would buy rifles. It was illegal to send them. It was so that he could be arrested for terrorism. So he marked them. The cases were marked Bibles, and they got shipped out to Kansas. So the Sharps rifle became known as the Beecher's Bible, right? People in the South were horrified. Wait a minute, in churches they're raising money, and then they're buying guns to go to Kansas to kill people? That doesn't sound like any version of Christianity that they thought of. But at any rate, that's all. Anyway, the company, they moved to out of Hartford to Bridgeport, and then they eventually fail. If you can find one of these online, they're extremely valuable. So it's 2:15. I guess we've run out of time. We almost got to the end of this. That's pretty good. All right. Do we have any questions? I know I talk fast. Yes.
The road system.
Mm-hmm.
What did they do? How early did they? What's that?
Start to pave them.
How early did they pave them?
Well, the macadamized system, you know, tarmac, it dates to about the 1820s, but it was extremely expensive. So they were really, you know, in the cities early on, but even you can look at pictures of Hartford in the 1880s, and other than Main Street, most of the roads they're not really paved, or they're old-fashioned cobblestones. It's the roads around the 1870s. Bicycles become really popular. And lots of people start riding bicycles, and they discover there are no street signs. If you're here in Simsbury and you want to go to Farmington, there's no sign that says Farmington is 6 miles that way. So we get and also the roads are dreadful. So it's the bicycle riders, they create what's called the Good Roads movement, and they push for maps, signs, and better roads. So we start to see really good paved roads by about 1900. The Connecticut Department of Transportation, it's one of the first in the country. I think it's 1896. And then it's after World War I that we start to see the first interstate highways. They're not highways, they're things like Route 70 and Route 20. You know, they're secondary roads like Route 10, but they were the first roads that connected the country. So, all right. Yes, sir.
I'd like to thank you. I grew up in the Whitneyville area.
You did?
Yes. And New Haven. And I remember early that canal where the railroad tracks were at the bottom of this canal.
Sure.
Never connected it, really.
They're making it into hike bike trail now. Yeah, I mean that runs through here, but in New Haven, yeah, it's still they've cleaned it up a lot, because it used to be they were people like homeless people and what you used to call winos, and it was kind of a dangerous area, and they've kind of cleaned it up now. But supposedly you're supposed to be able to walk or ride your bicycle all the way from downtown New Haven all the way to Northampton. The only unfinished section is in Plainville, because the old Canal Railroad, that section still operates. So.
I'm also a Central Vermont.
What's that?
I'm also a Central Vermont.
Oh, good. Okay, very good. All right. Any other questions, comments? When are we coming back? Is it April?
April 1st will be our
April 1st,
final segment
Tuesday?
of this, but we'll find something else for him to tell us about.
They are online, yes, yes.
Simsbury Community Television.
All right. Well, thank you. You've been a great audience. I know I ramble on, but
Thank you very much.
Oh, my pleasure.
you all for
My
coming.
pleasure.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.